Under what circumstances should the city give financial incentives to attract or retain businesses?
I believe that we should take a holistic approach in considering tax abatements and incentives. We need to consider first if the incentives are justified. Is the area blighted? Would the development happen without incentives? The but-for question. We need to consider the jobs created. In what ways can local labor be part of the construction to keep our dollars in the city? And how many jobs will be created as a result of the development? We also need to consider the impact on our taxing bodies. Over 60% of our property taxes fund the public schools. How will District 87 be affected, and for how long? I'm also interested to know how we're incentivizing local businesses and how we're working in concert with Normal to coordinate our incentives going forward. My role as an alderman is to be informed about these issues, seek input from city staff and my constituents, and to make the best informed decision possible for the entire community.
Chip Frank, when are business development incentives okay for a city to give?
Well, incentives certainly are a tool in our toolbox and can be used especially successful when combined with the private sector. We should always, it should be the exception, not the rule. And when looking at any opportunity, we should always consider the net impact for our community. One thing we have to be careful of, it's not always about bringing in new business, but what happens to our current business that we already have. And sometimes the tax incentives can work against that. So again, I think we need to look at the net impact for the community on each separate case.
Under what circumstances would you consider approving city use of eminent domain power or the taking of land from private owners to foster development or revitalization?
Yes, I think that if all routes have been exhausted, an eminent domain can be legally justified. It is a route that the city is authorized to consider. And there are some areas in downtown. I think one of the questions underneath this question is perhaps what are we going to do with the front and center building downtown? And in order to establish eminent domain, which is a last case resort, we need first to have a redevelopment plan, declare that area blighted, and provide some just compensation to the property owner. So I do think that it is important to consider as a potential tool we might use going forward.
Also in Ward 4, Chip Frank. Generally, I'd be very cautious with the use of eminent domain, especially for private development. You know, in the old days, you would look at eminent domain as taking farmland for a highway or something like that. Now, that's really moved nowadays to taking private property for private development, of which sometimes the private development doesn't even continue. And I think that's wrong. So I'd be very cautious using eminent domain.
What should the city do to encourage downtown revitalization and increase occupancy in vacant property? And this question comes from Greg Coos of Bloomington. First up on this is Julie Emig in Ward 4.
I would say that the Bloomington Comprehensive Plan provides a lot of really great direction for how we might continue to push for downtown development goals. I love our downtown Bloomington area. I think that we're on the verge of turning something incredible into something magnificent. In the spirit of incremental development, we can continue to improve outdoor space in downtown through public art, crosswalks of stamped concrete, perhaps a pavilion, more lighting. And these are immediate aspects, in fact, of the downtown task force that can be realized. I think that leveraging downtown assets such as the Route 66 Visitors Center and exploring the development of a downtown business incubator is also another potential approach that could make a big impact. There are many opportunities also to seek out funding through low-income housing tax credits, the National Register for Historic Renovation. There are creative ways to think about developing this space and finding multi-use structures for folks to enjoy what Bloomington has to offer.
And Chip Frank, and also in Ward 4.
The downtown is beating heart of any community. I work downtown, and we need to build on the positives that we already have to help promote our downtown. A vibrant cultural district, numerous entertainment venues, restaurants, businesses, law and justice center, just to name a few. Starting small, with a cleaner, more friendly downtown, we can start to build a strong and more engaging downtown, one brick at a time. I would be against increasing taxes and fees, especially if we haven't first exhausted all other possibilities. I will say that when I've been knocking on doors and talking to our citizens, everyone understands the need for better roads and infrastructure. So, and attending the city council meetings regularly like I have, it seems as if the gas tax has gotten some, has been moving down the hill and probably will be passed. If that's the case, I'd like to see this approximately $2.3 million be earmarked entirely for roads, maybe an enterprise fund, or for sure a sunset clause would make it much easier to stomach if we are going to increase taxes and fees.
Yes, I was listening to the conversation about whether or not to increase the gas tax last night with the Bloomington City Council. And before I were to make any decision about a fuel tax increase, I would want to get public and city staff input on a lot of the questions that were raised at the meeting last night. For example, other questions to consider might be whether or not a fuel tax is obsolete, given an increase in fuel-efficient cars and the development of new technology. The regressive tax problem has been mentioned. How will this have an impact on our low-income residents? Perhaps some of the offset could be directed towards free public transit passes on Connect Transit. I'm not sure. There might be a balance there. And how might we ensure to the public that the fuel tax revenue were specifically being spent on the roads, on asphalt and cement? And how can we continually communicate with that? And finally, how can we coordinate with Normal? They seem not to be in favor of this idea.
Bloomington would have to increase the amount of money spent on streets and sidewalks by about $2 million a year to stay even on the quality of streets. Streets are currently rated an average of 6 out of 10 on a 10-point scale. What should the policy goal be?
I've just recalled something that Alderman Burgess said last night about the relationship between what you expect to be funded and what actually happens. So we have an intention that we want our streets to be at a great capacity. And so balancing that with the amount of money that we need to spend in order to maintain that quality, there seems to be an information gap there. So I'd be interested in knowing more about the way that the roads are rated and how that is related to ultimately to the money that gets spent on them. I also think that there are other places to consider finding revenue, but at this point, all of the residents, other than my mechanic as well, Jeff, have stipulated that they really would like to see the roads fixed in Bloomington and are seeking creative input from those of us on City Council to provide direction.
And Chip Frank, your batting cleanup.
Well, it's a good question. And it's one that I think all of us are interested in having an answer to. But I think really it's not how good we want our streets. I mean, we live in the Midwest, so we know we're going to have potholes and problems like that. But it's really what's it cost to get the streets where we want it? And that's the real question. So, Jim Karch has asked for $5 million for streets and sidewalks this year, and the proposed budget looks like he's going to get that amount. That would have to be continued on for a number of years to have our streets rated at fair, which is probably a good indication of what we would receive in the Midwest. But it's really about money. What do you expect us to spend, and how important are the roads to you? And that's what it gets down to in my mind.
The Illinois General Assembly might, in the coming months, legalize recreational marijuana and sports betting. Municipalities are expected to have some measure of control over what's permitted locally. How permissive or restricted should the city be if both marijuana and sports betting become legalized in the coming year?
It seemed at the beginning that this might be a really zesty topic, but it sounds like we're all saying very similar kinds of things. I think there is a lot of precedent that we can look at regarding the legalization of recreational marijuana, and that it's a potential to get some revenue for our community as long as we regulate it safely as we do alcohol. I don't think prohibition worked very well in our historical passed. And in terms of sports betting, I think also it's important to regulate it and tax it the way we do any other entertainment body. I know that there is a concern about folks being incarcerated for having marijuana, and perhaps other folks being considered, at risk of a health problem. And we really do need to think about whether or not we have used the accusation of having marijuana as an unjust way to get people in jail.
Chip Frank, what's your take on marijuana and sports betting policy at the municipal level?
Well, Governor Pritzker supports legalizing recreational marijuana in the state. He has stated he wants to work with the legislature to legalize, tax, and regulate the sale of recreational cannabis. My concern at the municipal level is the implementation of this, administration and regulation of this potential new law. Same with sports betting. I'm pro-business, so I'd like to see the marketplace work. I don't think it's a moral issue personally, but it's more of the implementation, administration, and regulation of it and how we're going to do it.
What do you think needs to be done by the city to address the increase in gun violence and the societal problems that give rise to it?
The vigil for Trevante Kirkwood, a youth who was killed by gunfire, was an important reminder to our community that words and prayers will never, ever be enough. I attended the last Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America meeting, and their focus was about how the impact of gun violence extends far beyond those who are killed. There are survivors, family members, friends. Our very community is torn apart by these incidences. You don't have to be a mom to be part of this organization. You do have to care about taking action. So what can we do? My colleagues up here have mentioned examining root causes such as poverty, racial injustice, and domestic violence. I believe it is important to continue partnering with community resources and local law enforcement. I've seen incredible work come out of restorative justice policies in the city of Chicago. I can't say this enough: early intervention, early intervention, early intervention. That was the most successful lever that I have seen, and we need to keep pushing for reasonable gun reform at the state and local level.
And Chip Frank, the question is about gun violence and the societal problems that give rise to it. How do you tackle both those issues?
Well, first of all, public safety is number one for our community and city council. We need to provide the resources necessary for police and fire to do their job safely and efficiently. I attended a meeting recently that our police chief Wheeler held to go over the violent crime and violence in our community, and the room was packed, much like this. And he asked the question, what can be done about gun violence, and who in this room can help? 2/3 of the room raised their hand in saying that they are now working on this issue, and they feel it's a cultural issue, much as these people, as the other candidates have mentioned. So we have a lot of work to do. It is a little bit of a good news that the crime is actually down in Bloomington over the past years, but anybody that's been touched by crime, and especially violent crime, realizes that just one is too much.
Julie Emig, the question is, what should the city do about the affordable housing issue?
The Mid-Central Community Action in Bloomington says that a little more than 24,000 live at or below the poverty level. And part of addressing that is finding affordable housing. There was a white paper recently released by the Bloomington Housing Authority about the misconception of what affordable housing even is. It is not limited to low-income housing or even Section 8 housing. Affordable housing is housing for which occupants are paying no more than 30% of their income on gross housing costs, including utilities. So we are talking about a need to provide a variety of kinds of housing for the residents who live in our community, many of whom are really struggling to even, find a rental that they can afford, let alone own a home. And I also noted that Jeremy Hayes referred to affordable housing as a tool for economic development. And I thought going forward, it makes a lot of sense to see this concern as a way to communicate and collaborate with agencies in our community.
Chip Frank.
The McLean County Regional Planning Commission Housing Study in 2017 is a really good place to start on this topic. While housing is generally affordable in Bloomington Normal, there are gaps in the supply for the very low-income populations, the elderly, and disabled. I think we need to use the three-prong approach of public, nonprofit, and private sectors working together to help solve this problem. I support the continued assessment and development of affordable housing and support housing opportunities for all of our citizens.